Thoryn Stephens is a scientist, researcher, and entrepreneur with a background in molecular biology and a career spanning health technology and human performance optimization. He skis over 80 plus days per season, competes in triathlon nationals, and is developing a TED Talk on advancing human potential through AI, neuroscience, and brain computer interfaces. Disclaimer: any of the guidance offered by the podcast host, myself, or the podcast guests is our own guidance. We are not liable for any of the actions the podcast listener decides to do. Welcome to the show today, Thoryn. Glad to have you on. I'd love to know, first of all, where this passion for health or performance optimization comes from. Is it something that's always been with you from a young age and just curiosity, or is it like, right, I need to change my life around here? I'd love to hear a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, glad to be here. Nice to see you, Johnny, and appreciate all the things you do in the world. So to answer the question, I would say health performance became more prevalent in my life in my 20s. I was always very active as like a youth, and I went to a high school for competitive skiing and snowboarding, but I went into molecular biology. And so science was always a driver. But then when I was in my 20s, I began trail running initially. So I was doing like a Susan G. Komen 10K. That went to half marathons, and then ultimately to triathlon. And triathlon really has been a focus of mine for the last 20 years. And it's through that experience, actually, that I really began to get into peak performance and the concept of optimizing your biology by using data, and then ultimately to improve an outcome, which could be anything from sleep to anxiety. It also could be, of course, just finishing a race. But that was really what started to galvanize it, was that idea that as you're training for a full Ironman, you're optimizing your health in real time, your biology in real time, essentially with wearables and data.
Oh, wow. So kind of like your own optimization, and then just it went on from there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we talk about, we are, like a research term, but we're an N of one. Like for me and my friends, I live in Colorado, we're very active, peak performance, and we're constantly optimizing our biology. It could be using things like peptides. It, of course, could be supplementation. It could be, training for a race, whatever it might be. But, ultimately, we're constantly, looking to improve our cognitive, mental, performance, essentially.
And there's quite a lot of information out there and things to get.
100%.
How did you know where to begin when you were really trying to optimize yourself?
Yeah, community, first and foremost, I would say. That's a really integral part of human existence. And, in the Brain One platform, we consider community a micro habit. So, how much time you spend with community, by extension, that could be purpose, but community is a really large part. And so when I was really training, I was in a triathlon community, and, we would be, and this is like 2015. I remember we were doing this triathlon training camp in Central Coast of California, and we look over and we're like, Dean, what are you doing over there? And he has this red light, essentially like panel on his knee. And this is like 10 years ago, where red light was just becoming more prevalent. Now it's like on Tony Robbins' homepage, it's everywhere now. But 10 years ago, no one knew what it was. And so a lot of these, what are now more common longevity, I would say tips and tricks and things you can do are like becoming very commonplace, which is awesome. Another example could be cold plunging. Within my community, recovery always incorporated cold. And we do a lot of swimming, things like that. But the cold and then the contrast to the hot, sauna, all these things, are really integral to many longevity protocols today.
Yeah, the cold plunges has got quite popular.
100%. Yeah. I mean, we have one upstairs, I do it in the river. Like, yeah, it's an amazing modality for most humans, not everyone. But
so how are you kind of like picking this out, like helping others with this now?
Yeah. So full circle, it was about 2 years ago. I decided I needed to come back to my purpose and my passion of science. And as I was going down that road, what we saw was there was really much a need for for brain and nervous system optimization and education, and people are not really taught about the brain and the concepts of like neuroplasticity. And your brain continues to learn and, essentially regrow neurons up until your later stages of life, even your 70s and 80s. And just that concept that, the brain really is a muscle, like any other muscle, it needs to be exercised, and further the concept of brain fitness. So that's really been a passion of mine these last couple of years. And we built a platform around that to help humans track and understand essentially these different micro habits, routines, what we call a protocol, essentially things that you do every day. And that's really the backbone for what we do. And having advanced measurement and data unification is how we generally think about the world.
You mentioned about micro habits. So what are kind of micro habits?
Yeah. So micro habits, the concept, there's a really good book called Atomic Habits, which I would highly recommend. Yeah, exactly. And so, the way I would frame it is we are artifacts of the things that we do, every day. When you wake up in the morning, what is your daily routine? And do you follow a structured, essentially framework of things that you do or not, but what does that daily routine look like? And so the way we think about the world is you have essentially micro habits, and that's the foundation. And so these are small lifestyle, they could be incremental changes that you're doing every day as part of your overall health. And so one example would be circadian regulation or getting direct sunlight as close to your waking time as possible, and the impacts of the direct sunlight and ultimately your cortisol levels throughout the entire day. And so that would be morning sunlight, circadian regulation, essentially micro habit. And that would be one of the things you would do in your morning, along with, maybe drinking water and, spending time with family and da da da. So, but that's how that's kind of the foundation essentially are these micro habits. Micro habits make a protocol. A protocol are just the steps that you do. And then the concept of a program, which could incorporate like education, things like that. But fundamentally, that's how we generally think of the world.
I was just thinking, for the person who might think, oh, there's so many things to do to be healthy and optimize. How do I
Yeah.
do it all?
Well, certainly there are, but you can really just distill it back to the core principles. And so even if you're doing like one or two things a day and you're moving in the right direction, that's progress, ultimately. And some of these are very fundamental. And but by having at least a list of things that you're following, that is a good springboard. And I go back to when I was Ironman, distance training. You're following a protocol of swim, bike, run, but then you're optimizing your hydration, your nutrition, your carbohydrates, electrolytes, all these things, in real time. And so it's no different. It's really just as a springboard, starting simple. What we recommend is, again, if you're looking for neurological optimization, you want to really start with the basics. And that's going to be nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress, some sort of metabolic support, and ultimately community and connection. And we've analyzed tens of thousands of longevity protocols and papers, and it really comes down to those like 5 or 6 core pillars ultimately. And so it can feel overwhelming. We actually have a platform we're going to be pushing to market in about 3 months, totally open. And people can go and download dementia prevention protocols, basically. And our goal is to reach 1 million humans through dementia prevention. And again, it's just following a structured framework, again, of micro habits and the things that you do.
I like that you've built a framework for people that you found from all this research, this study, you've been out there, that it kind of sounds like it simplifies it like really down for people.
That's it, percent. And keeping it simple, like humans are incredibly complex. The technology is not the challenge, it's usually the humans. So again, even if it's like 3 things that you try to work into your daily routine, and then what we see is those then become non-negotiables, in your life. Sleep, as an example, sleep is a non-negotiable. Like everyone's like, oh, longevity hacks, peptides, give me this pill. It's sleep. If you get good quality sleep with the proper percentage of REM and deep sleep every night, I mean, there's no better longevity hack than that. So you have to start there. The fundamentals, what does that mean? What are the micro habits? Well, having a bedroom that is dark, not being on screens 2 hours before bed, lower temperature in the bedroom, those types of things, you can really begin just to optimize, again, that one area of sleep as an example. So there's lots of these small, again, micro habits, these little incremental changes that really have a large impact.
I personally find sleep so important for me, and there's the old achiever in me was like, no, I'm going to get all this work done, I'll be all right on 5 or 6. I was not.
Yeah. Well, it's really, it's quite crazy because, society and culture, we talk about, the hustle and the grind. Yeah, and I grew up in Silicon Valley, and it's like you sleep for 3 or 4 hours a night, and like that's literally the worst thing you can do, neurologically, biologically, physiologically, for your body. There's nothing worse than not getting quality sleep. So yeah, it's kind of the antithesis, really, of what you should be doing. But that's what's also cool is now we have these great tools. We have wearables as an example. Do you wear any wearables, Johnny?
I don't know.
Yeah. Do you know the Aura Ring?
Yeah, yeah, the Aura
Yeah.
Ring. Yeah.
Amazing company, Scandinavian, and they just have a sleep tracker. And that is an example of how we would apply in our protocols. The overarching micro habit is sleep, and then you have a breakdown of the different things, and then you start to measure it, and you can see how is your sleep. And then you start to see further your other micro habits like drinking alcohol. You have one glass of wine or a Guinness, a couple hours before bed, and how does that ultimately change not just your sleep, but then into specific metrics like heart rate variability. And heart rate variability is a measurement of your parasympathetic nervous system. So how, what's your ability to basically relax and de-stress and ultimately recover, So that's what's also cool is now you can, get these tools fairly inexpensively and, utilize them in these technology environments.
That's cool. It gives you that data point that you're all about.
That's it. Yeah. And you don't want to obsess about the data, but at the same time, it's just it's a governance. So you know where you're at now and how do you improve. And you can actually see you can improve your sleep patterns, through these micro habit changes. That's another big piece of this is people need to see progress.
Can't manage what you can't measure.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I had one of yep. When I was back in biotechnology, I had a mentor who used to say that.
That just came to mind in that. What's the power in community have you found? Because that was one of the habits.
Sure.
I know some people have that mentality of like, I'm going to do it alone kind of thing sometimes.
Certainly. Yeah, I'm probably more of a lone wolf archetype. However, community is absolutely critical. On the neurological side, I was meeting with the Center for Brain Health out of UT Dallas a couple years ago. I was just starting Brain One. I was very excited, and we're pulling in all these data, these biomarkers and biometrics. And I met with Dr. Sandra Chapman, the chairwoman. I was like, Sandra, this is what we're doing. She's like, yeah, Thoryn, that's cool. What's really cool is community. And she, really exemplified some of their research where humans that have a sense of community, that have a sense of purpose, they can live 10 to 15 years longer, than humans that don't. When you wake up in the morning, if you don't have, like some sense of, again, purpose, some excitement in the world, you will generally die younger, So community is absolutely everything. And that can be going out with friends. I'm not a huge drinker, but it could be a structured activity, book clubs, chess club, I mean, I don't know, dance, like whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But just having that connection, to yourself, but also to, the broader good, basically. Absolutely integral.
Oh, awesome. What you mentioned about like purpose as well, like having that sense of purpose. Is that another one you mentioned in one of the community?
I mean, I kind of, they are independent, yes. So community and purpose. But yeah, I mean, again, similarly, people that wake up in the morning and have purpose, like the worst thing that we've seen as humans get older and then in the United States, they retire, which, can make sense to a degree. But when you become less neurologically active through even, the act of working, it's actually generally can be negative for the person. When they go to an old folks home and, they're just not as physically active, but mentally active. Yeah. So, but related, again, that sense of purpose when you wake up in the morning, do you feel like you're doing something greater than yourself? And it could be as simple as like bagging groceries, it doesn't matter, but you wake up with that sense of purpose and you're fulfilling something inside of yourself. For me, I'd like to reach 1 billion humans and help them optimize their brains. That's our purpose. That's our mission that we're running towards. It's different for everyone, and it can be very small. It can just be spending time with your grandchildren or, your family. But yeah, that purpose, just like community, is absolutely critical.
I've asked this to other guests before, and I'd love to ask you a little bit, see your thoughts on it. Someone who's maybe a little bit lost, like completely like no idea what I'm here to do. What is it that I want to do? Is there any guidance you could offer that individual?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been asked that a lot in my life because I always woke up with purpose, which I thought was normal. And I remember once I was in college and I was living with like these 5 girls from New Jersey. One of them, Jen, was like, Thoryn, and at the time I was studying, double major biology. My background's in molecular biology. And she's like, how did you how did you just know what you wanted to do? And this is like, I was like 18 at the time, 17, 18, when I started college. My answer, I was like surprised because I've always known, I've always had that direction. There's always been like some trajectory pulling me forward in a very specific direction. I think if you are struggling with that, maybe starting with what are the things that you truly love? Like what brings you joy in the world? Because I feel you have to start there. If you like want to, if you think your purpose is making money and you wake up and you go to a job that you don't love, like that to me is not fulfilling, that purpose or that joy. And so I think you have to really start with, what are the things that you love and what brings you joy in the world? And ultimately, that can help lay the blueprint of maybe where you can go in that.
Feeling into what they love rather than about trying
I
to.
mean, I know it's like, oh yeah, it sounds rudimentary, but like it's one of those things, like even when I was, working in biotech in my 20s, I used to love getting up and going to work. Like there was never a morning I was like, oh, I got to go into the lab again. I loved it because I loved the work. And even though, not everything's perfect, da da da, but still, and so that's it. If you love what you do, you are you will generally be a happy human. If you don't, if you, hate the grind and going in and your, boss is a jerk and all the things which, we've experienced. But yeah, that's again one of those kind of like micro habits. We have another one like no assholes, like I do not surround myself with any type of asshole or, egoist human. I just don't. I have, amazing humans in my life, but, a very strict no asshole policy.
I love that, the no asshole policy. Protecting your energy, right?
That's it, 100%. And to the prior point, you are a reflection of who you surround yourself with. You surround yourselves with assholes, guess what? You'll probably become an asshole yourself. Not guaranteed, but yeah. So I think that's a really, again, that'd be considered, I almost think that's a non-negotiable, but the people you surround yourself with, absolutely critical.
Okay. From kind of in a similar space, but kind of moving another sort of direction, from people from the elite like performance that maybe you've studied or maybe even worked with, those who are like consistently good at what they do, whether it's an athlete or just in business or something like that. How do you like? What's the difference in them being able to stick to habits? Do you find than other people don't do?
Discipline, right? Like accountability, motivation, but I would just say big picture discipline. Ultimately, if you are a peak performance athlete, we have a very close friend of the family. His name's Malik Jackson. He's a Super Bowl NFL champion. He won Super Bowl 50 with the Denver Broncos, amazing human. And, talking with him again about his, what we call a protocol, but just his routine, which is actually on the Brain One site I can share with you. But, what does someone like him do every morning when they wake up? What does their day look like relative to structure? And that's the one thing I would say, again, related to discipline is structure. Usually these humans, and it doesn't have to be like you have your, steadfast list that you do da da da, but usually there's absolutely structure behind it. I also believe you want to lend yourself some flexibility. So if you can't do a certain thing, it's okay. But again, I think to answer your question, discipline and structure, everything.
And what do you sometimes discipline for me, and I know I've heard people say this, can be associated with the word like hard, like grind, exhaustion, and it's like, how do I have fun in life?
Yeah.
I've heard that kind of feedback from people. I'd just love to know your thoughts on that.
Again, I think you can have a lot of fun with discipline, though. Again, it goes back to that prior point around finding joy in the world. What do you truly love to do? And I think that also kind of morphs over time. I live here in Colorado. I do hot Pilates like 4 or 5 days a week. And in the winter, I try to ski and snowboard every single day. My highest, I got 120 days in once. Not as much now with the startup, but so ideally it's combining your discipline, the things that you should do with what you love to do. And that to me again is like that secret sauce. Same with work, you want to try to love what you do, find that sweet spot. So yeah, that's generally how I think about the world. It doesn't have to be hard. I mean, some things are hard, but that's also where growth happens. So I think it can be a balance, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a grind. Ideally it's something like, as an example, right? Like with exercise, I mean, it's such a broad spectrum of things that you can do, so you should be able to find one or two things, that you love to do on a weekly basis that you can continue with, to keep you ultimately healthy.
I know for me, I love playing football or soccer, as you call it over there,
Sure.
with the guys,
Yeah,
social, running around for 90 minutes up and down. It's just fun. And then I got
100%.
paddle with the guys on
Sure.
Wednesday. You know,
Yeah, exactly. And that's a perfect example. I mean, those are like a couple micro habits. Like one is you have the sport, a football or a paddle, and then you also have community. You're meeting with your friends and just being around other people, like these are the types of micro habits, again, incrementally that really, improve your overall health, your overall physiology.
and also what I was kind of getting or came up for me there was finding things that are good for you that you can find fun as well. Because I know I'm just thinking a lot of people like to drink like heavy on the weekend. I was definitely one of them in my 20s.
Of course, we all were. Yeah.
It's just finding, I guess, finding something that's gonna serve you a bit more and that you can find fun.
100%. And again, in that instance, having moderation. Do you go out and have two beers with your buddies or, 20 or 10? I mean, that's a big, I think just something to be very cognizant of. Because at the same time, things that you love can be detrimental, of course, and drinking is kind of one of the best, worst examples. I mean, it's great, it has community, but of course, alcohol in general is just not really a healthy substance.
So, what work are you doing with AI on the brain at the moment?
Yeah. So our core model pulls in a number of different types of what we call outcome measures, but basically just measurement. So relative to brain, I mean, first off, we start with biometrics. So these are data points coming out of wearables. Currently wearing a Garmin. I sleep with an Aura ring. Also have a Whoop. We have over 300 integrations into our system, but we feel that is part of the foundation is just, again, broadly measurement, outcome measures, and then having specific measurements for, in this case, the nervous system, the parasympathetic. You could look at heart rate variability as an example. So we get that baseline coming out of the wearables. We also are integrating a EEG device, which essentially measures your brain activity to keep it simple, but can really be helpful in things like TBI. So we work with the NFL athletes, and so we're essentially amalgamating these different types of data points into one user profile that can then be helpful in making recommended changes to micro habits, routines, essentially your protocol, things of that nature. And so we use AI throughout that entire process, fundamentally.
Did you say TBI as well? You work with people with traumatic brain injury.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Yes. It's very prevalent, especially with athletes, snowboarders, football, of course, very, very prevalent. And we have seen some really, amazing recovery use cases. There was one, this guy smacked his head on ice. He had a very severe TBI and he was kind of misdiagnosed and he came back to it years later and he used this EEG brain mapping device called a WAVI and was able to see pre and post essentially his protocol, the improvements in the neurological electrical activity of his brain. And that was using some level of supplementation. It was NAD, glutathione, but then also hyperbaric chamber. And, that was part of his core protocol. Again, like miracle story.
Wow, so crazy how you can reverse some of these things and work through it.
100%. Yeah. And the worst thing you could do is not try. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of options out there to help people in their brain journey as well as just their overall, health journey. But as you mentioned earlier, it's also challenging because there's so much misinformation. People are just uploading everything into ChatGPT, and that's pretty dangerous, at this stage of the game. But they're doing it because they're not, their doctors don't know many of the tests they may be getting. Most doctors don't know nutrition, at least in the United States. They also don't know genomics, let alone epigenomics, and some of the more advanced areas of gene expression.
How do you manage and yeah, I can relate to what you said about the ChatGPT being over people getting very over reliant on it. Me, I've been guilty of using it a bit myself, but not for
Of course.
health stuff
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be guilt, but yeah, I mean, you have to be careful because you don't necessarily know where the data or the information it's giving you is coming from. It could be a reputable source, but when you get into health, it gets pretty messy unless, it really understands your physiology. So that's not the problem we really looked to. We didn't, set out to solve that problem, but we've been seeing it now for the last year and a half, and it's terrifying because you have your family and friends that are uploading all their data into a non-secure system, basically, and getting recommendations that are not completely validated.
Could be quite general advice, right? Like as well, may not specific to them. It could just be a source from a website.
Yeah, I mean, it could be general or it could be, like it could appear specific to them, but to your point, not necessarily really be. It may not know, when you get into medical, you have things like contraindications. So if it doesn't know your whole medical history of what you're currently on, it could make a recommendation, and ultimately it could be, an adverse event to your health. So it's a little crazy. It's a little Wild West. We're trying to put some harmony around that, with our core system to help people, through these journeys because we're very much, in the same place. So yeah, that's kind of the general perspective.
Oh, yeah, some good points there for people to be mindful of. I wanted to ask Florian about you do a lot. You like research, you providing a lot of value to people. You got your mission that clearly lights you up. You can tell that from your energy. How do you how do you manage your time? Because I'd imagine you got so much on, so much in your head. I'd love to know just how you kind of like balance things a little bit, or maybe balance isn't the right word, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe there are a lot of hours in the day. And whenever I meet someone and they're like, oh, I'm so busy, I just, when I hear that, it makes me feel like, oh, you're just inefficient. You don't manage your time correctly. Whenever someone's like, oh, I'm so busy. I mean, I know a lot of extremely busy humans that are hyper productive that also have time for their families. So I think it is a bit of a balance, but it's also, again, just time management. There's a lot of hours in the day, and it's just how you structure it and how you spend your time, how you spend those micro habits. Are you out all night drinking or are you home and in bed by 9 o'clock and you wake up the next morning refreshed, like micro habits, these are all the small incremental changes and things. So time management is absolutely crucial, but I believe there's so many hours in the day and there's always time, to find with your loved ones.
Do you find there's a time in the day that you're more productive than others?
Mornings. Yeah,
Mhm.
100%. Yeah. My wife is evenings. She's a digital artist, sculpturist. So she's up late, but I'm up at like 5 in the morning every day. So yeah, definitely higher neurological activity in the mornings.
It's interesting. You're opposites.
Oh, totally opposite. Yeah. I mean, yes, but it's okay too. But yeah, up very early every day. It's funny. We actually, we developed these protocols. We looked at traditional protocols across like Sparta and Japan and China and India. And what we saw was like in these ancient protocols, getting up early, as a micro habit, or it's pervasive across all of them, which of course in the olden days you basically had to get up early. But as part of again that point around discipline and having a structured framework, that's another just a good example of a kind of a non-negotiable micro habit.
I guess you have some kind of structure on going to bed at a certain time.
I try to, I mean, within reason, like definitely have a structure, but it also, it can change depending on, the things going on in your life. So I think it's important to have that structure, but also forgiving yourself, if things do change and, you are out drinking all night, it's not the end of the world. Just don't do it, all the time. It's okay to do these things and ultimately live your life and find that joy, but it, like anything, just needs to be balanced.
Hmm, that's some good points. No, foreign. I'd love to know where is the best place as we kind of wrap up today, where the listener can find you to get hold of
Sure.
your amazing work, your amazing tools and services that you're providing people with. And
Awesome.
is there mainly a final point or final word you'd like to leave us with today?
Yeah. So to the first point, they can find us on brain.one. And then also we have a new property called peptides.one, which we're offering to help people in their peptide journey. Are peptides big in your universe, Johnny? Are you hearing a lot about them or no?
I've been speaking to quite a few people on podcasts about them, but they're not so
Yeah,
much
not so
wildlife
much.
or thoughts about in the UK.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure they're coming. Anyway, we could do a whole episode on that next time. Let me know. But yeah, so brain.one, peptides.one are our core websites, and we do have a dementia prevention protocol that we'll be giving away that'll be coming out in these next couple months. The readers can go, they can sign up for our wait list. And these are, essentially protocols and micro habits that all of our grandparents, all of our parents should be following right now. not in their 60s and 70s, you can start the journey immediately. Do not wait. And I guess that would be maybe the parting word is, we are an artifact of, again, the people we surround ourselves with and the decisions we make every day, what we call micro habits. It's part of your daily routine, your daily protocol. And you have some control there, ultimately who you surround yourself with. And in some ways it's empowering. So, from that perspective, we can still drive change. It's not too late. There's always like optimism and hope and in all things.
Oh, amazing. Some great final words there. Not to, begin right now. Don't wait.
Yeah. Well, great chatting with you, John. I really appreciated the conversation.
And thank you, Thoryn. And to grab Thoryn's links that he's mentioned, you can just go into the show notes below and we'll have those links for you to get some of these amazing resources and offerings he is giving the world. So, yeah, a final thank you for coming on today and everything you've shared. And I know there's so much more, so please check out Thoryn's links below this episode. So that concludes today's episode. And remember to leave with your heart and not with fear.